Hello, this is Historical Fiction with Kviatoslav, and I realized I've been reviewing my Alfred Duggan books in chronological order. Not from when the author wrote them, not from that year, but from when they would happen kind of historically there. And I've reached the end of the Roman Empire in Britain with the last book that I reviewed, The Little Emperors, and I realized that there were two books that I had actually skipped over, and I wanted to remedy that now and go back because these are the two earliest books, not the first books that Duggan wrote, but the earliest settings that he utilized in his books there. And the first one that I'd like to speak about is a book called Founding Fathers. It actually had a different title. This happens occasionally with Duggan's books in the U.S. It was called Children of the Wolf. I think just because it generally the term Founding Fathers in the U.S. is used for kind of early American politicians there. But in order to avoid that confusion, it's got the much more kind of literal title there, Children of the Wolf, because this is definitely the earliest setting that Alfred Duggan ever utilized in any of his books, because it's set during the legendary founding of Rome. So it's also the closest that Duggan gets to kind of almost a mythical setting there. But he takes it as the novel spans about 35 years, from King Romulus's murder of his brother to his own death, which is about 35 years later there. So it actually covers a wide time period there. And it's actually very different from most of Duggan's books, as he usually follows a single figure throughout their time, be that an actual historical figure or an invented personage there. But in this one, he actually follows a number of characters who interact at kind of different intervals of the founding. There's a Latin character, an Etruscan, a Sabine, a Greek, and they all contribute to Rome's kind of cosmopolitan nature there. It feels a little bit like kind of a time slip novel, because the characters' perspectives are changing there. I'm a big kind of fan of time slip novels there, but this one, it never really gained as much momentum for me as some of his other ones. Where the book is really successful is I think it shows the kind of chaotic nature of Rome's founding, as well as the reasons why Rome was successful and why other city-states in the Italian peninsula were not. Namely, the idea that these refugees could gain Roman citizenship, and that became a prize that the outcast could aspire to, as well as the city's very merciful way of dealing with defeated foes. They kind of incorporated them into the city itself rather than usual kind of ransacking and destruction there. Um, Overall, it does hold a few surprises there, but I found the story a bit more difficult to get into than some of his other ones. It does have its moments. I'd recommend it there. Interestingly, Romulus himself never actually makes an appearance there, but it does show kind of the success of, it interestingly begins with the murder of his brother Remus there, and sorry if that's a spoiler, but there's a reason that the city is called Rome and not Rим there. So I think we know who won that particular struggle there. Overall, I would say it's readable like all Duggan novels, but I definitely wouldn't put it in the top tier there. Moving along in history to the next novel, historically, that Duggan covered. And this one is an interesting one because generally Alfred Duggan, he had a few subjects that he tended to specialize in. Generally the Roman Empire, the Normans, the Crusades, the Anglo-Saxons, and so on there. So he had a few kind of topics that he liked. This was one of the few times that he went kind of outside of that and actually covered some Macedonian Greeks. So very famously, to the strongest was Alexander the Great's famous deathbed reply to the question of who would inherit his empire. This, of course, set off years of civil war as the generals of Alexander's empire began to carve it up. So, in this novel, Alfred Duggan attempts to tell the story of the son of one of Alexander's generals, a Macedonian known as Demetrius of Macedon, the besieger there. Interestingly, the research for this novel was not done by Duggan, but by a history professor in Texas who had planned to write the novel himself before his untimely death. So, not wanting the research to go to waste, the professor's widow actually sent the research to Alfred Duggan, who used it to write his own novel there. Demetrius himself, he fits the mold of a typical kind of Duggan subject. He was a dreamer who tried and failed, thereby showing why Alexander was successful and those who followed him were not, much as he had shown with Lepidus in Three's Company. But unlike Lepidus, Demetrius, he's kind of a stuffed shirt. We never really get a sense of his flaws. He's declared by the Hellenes as a god, and to some extent, it's his somewhat arrogant attempt to reunify the Empire of Alexander that leads to his downfall. He never really comes to life off the page for me, which is filled with kind of bland description of giant battles on three continents, this odd kind of myriad of alliances and betrayals among the generals there. This is the only book concerning ancient Macedon which Duggan wrote, and the subject just doesn't seem to interest him as much as the Roman Empire or the Norman Crusaders. Demetrius has some interesting insights about democracy, such as considering give slaves and women the vote. He also has no less than 3 wives at one time to cement allies. It's this kind of insight into the Macedonian world, which is kind of the most interesting subject, such as the use of elephants as machines of war, where soldiers are paid mercenaries, which predates both the Roman Empire and feudalism. But unfortunately, the book was just not as memorable as a result. When I decided to reread this for my project, I remembered almost nothing from the original reading. One interesting thing about Alfred Duggan is that his quality can vary from book to book. This one, unfortunately, ranks a bit low on his scale of excellence there. The most interesting thing about it are Demetrius's interactions with his sometimes ally, sometimes enemy, Pyrrhus of Epirus there, who gave us the term Pyrrhic victory, if you've ever heard of that. And I think he would have probably made a much more interesting protagonist than Demetrius himself. So overall, I would say this one, I said, if you're going to read an Alfred Duggan book, this isn't the first one that I would recommend. Thanks for listening. Goodbye.